Hello and welcome, everyone. Very excited for today's podcast. Welcome to the Social Work is Everywhere podcast, where we uncover the powerful, diverse, and far reaching impact of social work across the globe.
Each episode, we spotlight the practice, research, and experience of students and social workers from a wide range of industries and professions, from clinical care to policy change, from leadership to grassroots advocacy and community engagement. Social work is truly everywhere.
Through the voices of the University of Maryland School of Social Work community, including faculty, staff, students, alumni, global partners, and partners within the university across campus, we'll explore unique perspectives and innovative initiatives shaping the future of the field. We are your hosts, Dr. Lynn Murphy, Michalopoulos.
And David Robertson.
Today, I'm super excited to be interviewing two colleagues of mine and friends. So welcome to you both.
To open up and begin this conversation, I'd love for you both just to give a brief description of your role at CGE. Virginia, if you want to start.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me and Amy to the podcast. It's really an honor, and I support what the School of Social Work is doing in the global area so much. So I'm happy to be here today. I am the Assistant Vice President for Global Engagement at UMB. And that really means working here at the Center for Global Engagement, which is a campus-wide center that supports all the schools on campus with their global engagement dreams and goals. And so my job is really to work with the rest of the staff at the Center for Global Engagement to see how we can help the schools. And we really try to push from behind and create opportunities and let the faculty, staff, and students at the schools really shine and do what they want to do. And I'm also a lawyer and an associate professor at the University of Maryland School for Graduate Studies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn and David, for having us on this podcast. So excited to be here. My name is Amy Ramirez, and I am the Executive Director for Global Learning and International Services in the Center for Global Engagement. So the way I like to describe my work is I wear two hats. One is as the Executive Director for International Services, which means that I oversee the Office of International Services, which is a part of CGE. And we work with all the international students and researchers and faculty who come to UMB from around the world. And then the Global Learning hat is a more recent addition to my portfolio. And that work is more focused on how do we get more global education opportunities embedded into the learning experience of UMB students. So thinking about how do we get it into the curriculum across UMB's 7 schools? How do we support faculty members in doing that work? And also how do we become a central repository of all of the global education opportunities, both experiential, but also within the curriculum that exist across the institution, cheerleading the efforts of our faculty, also really helping students identify where they can find opportunities to take a seed of an idea and really figure out how to fund it, how to do it, how to experience it during their studies here at UMB.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you both. It's interesting, both you, Virginia, mentioned that you're a lawyer, and Amy, you're in the field of education. It'd be great to hear, and Amy, if you wanted to start, like what actually got you into this work?
Yeah, so when people ask me that, and I always like to start by saying, I start really early because I grew up in Queens, New York, which if anybody has ever experienced Queens, New York, you know that it's an incredibly diverse place in our country, right? Lots of immigrants from around the world, very racially and ethnically diverse, domestic diversity as well. And so I did not know when I was growing up that that wasn't the entire lived experience of our country. That was my lived experience. And so I just got interested and curious about the world. That was very naturalized for me. And so, because I had friends from all over the place. And so when I went to college, I did all the things that often become your entree into the international education field. I studied Spanish, I worked in the international office, I studied abroad, and I made lots of friends with international students. And so that was very much my entree. I've spent over 20 years now working with international students and faculty members. So that is where a lot of my expertise comes from. But in the course of my career, I became just much more interested as well. And just thinking through how is it that we think about not just who is on our campus, but also how are the learning spaces of the university making our international students feel welcomed, supported, like their views of the world matter, right? And their understandings of the world matter, which is why I got increasingly interested in what we call in the international education field, the curriculum internationalization space.
That's great. I love that. Thank you. And Virginia, how about you?
Well, it's funny. I'm glad you asked because it's a little bit of the history of the Center for Global Engagement. And whereas Amy sort of came up in what might be a more traditional way, I definitely zoomed into this field sideways. And I was in the Peace Corps in the Marshall Islands, but that was, I had sort of put that behind me. And I was trained as a health lawyer, and I was working sort of understanding how health is regulated in this country from a very domestic point of view. And I was managing director at the Law and Healthcare program at our law school here on campus. And in about 12 years ago, a wonderful professor named Hala Azam at the School of Medicine got an NIH Fogarty International Center grant called a Framework for Global Health grant. And this was to incentivize universities to create interprofessional global health resource centers on their campus. And so she got the grant from the School of Medicine, and she reached out to all the schools on campus. And she said, we need a rep from every school on campus to come to this fledgling resource center and to be the advisory committee. And so my boss at the law school was like, oh, you were in the Peace Corps. You go to represent the law school at this committee. And sure enough, that committee that I always joke met in a room without windows. We were just eating lunch out of Tupperwares and reporting out, started to grow and started to become a place where people would come with questions about global engagement, partnerships, education abroad, other issues. And I always held back a little thinking, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a global health expert. And Jody Olson, who was a faculty member at the School of Social Work before she went to run the Peace Corps, she and I held back, but the bylaws of this group were like everyone had to take leadership. And finally, it had to be us. And we decided to join forces. And we sort of said, look, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And we're going to take the budget, which there was some money, and just start creating programs and really doing this thing called interprofessional global health. And so that's finally, it took so much of my time that I had to break away from the law school and move over to run the center permanently. And so now in the 12 years, it's growing to 9 staff members and a real center with a big C. And that's how I got involved and really love it and would never want to go back.
I just want to ask a follow-up question of those beginning projects. What did they look like?
Well, the first project we did, and I'll tell you, this grant brought $100,000 a year with it. And we were having trouble spending it because there were a lot of sort of rules and regulations that we had created to try to use it. And so what Jody and I decided to do was really something big and dramatic, which was to take faculty members and students from all the schools to Malawi. And we chose Malawi because we had an existing NIH-funded project there related to malaria. And so there was some infrastructure there. And at the time, and I'm sure still now to some degree, the country was struggling with issues related to orphans and vulnerable children, which has a component for a lot of the schools on campus that students and faculty could engage with. So we took a huge team because remember, there are 7 schools on campus. So that's 7 students, 7 faculty members, me and Jody, and really developed a program that went on like that for 4 years. But one thing that's interesting is reflecting back, we did not we really put the horse before the cart, like no learning outcomes, not really thinking about safety and security, sort of not thinking about also what impact that was this appropriate for Malawi, and were we taking up time of people there who needed to be focusing on other things? Were we imposing ourselves on them? But was really fertile ground for learning. And what we learned was that we can do this. Students can really learn from each other, from the other professions, but we need to do this right. And it set us on the path to really studying the ethical components of education abroad in partnership. And so that's what we did for the first 4 years before he's got somewhat more sophisticated than those big, huge group projects.
That's interesting. One of the other episodes that we've had, we were talking about the concept of charity versus solidarity. And I think that you bring up that exact point.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we have really grown as a center and as a university. At first we could have thought of ourselves as like a service center, but then we realized that we could do so much more, and we could introduce rigor and ethics into everything we do. And that's been something that we've been very proud of, and we've engaged in scholarship in that area. So I can look back on some of the projects and say, oof, that I am a recovering volunteerist, and I've done things that I shouldn't have done. And then now I really want to make sure that's something that we don't repeat.
Question for both of you. What does it mean to be a global citizen?
Well, I can start in that I see that in two ways. And I'm curious, I'm sure Amy will add to what I say, is I think in our personal lives, outside of the educational context, it means having enough exposure to global communities, to history, to context, that you can look at a global issue and really understand how complex that issue is, and bring to it a much more sophisticated, nuanced understanding. And I think you can tell why that would be so important nowadays, that every situation has 1,000 years of history behind it, has religious and political context. And while you can never understand all or even most of the history or the context, you can understand that it's there, and that deep sensitivity is required when encountering issues and challenges in the world and different people that you run into. From a professional perspective, and it's sort of what I see the role of my job is that that we want to turn out professionals, students who graduate from this campus having a global perspective, not only in their personal life, but professionally, and understanding that their profession, the way they do it in the United States, is one way of carrying out that profession, but there are other ways, there are other good ways of doing things. And so basically to open their eyes to different ways of thinking and being, to hopefully make them better professionals. They're mostly here in the United States where most are going to practice. So
Right.
I see it from both sides.
Yeah. And there's so many different sort of academic definitions around this topic, but the way I always come back to it is always, I'm relentlessly sort of thinking about how do we broaden the circle of concern, right? In our conversations around any topic.
Yeah.
Right? Around almost anything,
Mhm.
right? How do we constantly think about, how do we think about who we care about, right? And I know that can feel very heavy at times, or there will be some people that will say, well, and I have these conversations with neighbors and with close friends, community members locally, and it's just like, well, I think we started home and then we gradually widen out from there. And I can appreciate that perspective. We act locally every day, right? And the practices of citizenship are very local ones, right? But
Right.
I think that it's a constant thinking and reflecting upon how do we broaden the circle of concern, right? We can't all be perfect, and we can't, as much as our aspirations and our optimism will lead us to say, we can't, what are we divesting ourselves from, right? Sometimes it's, what are we leaning into, and what are we really trying to pour ourselves into in a given moment, right? But I am always thinking about, how do we strive every day to live values, see our common humanity, but also how do we move the needle and engage in a set of practices every day that demonstrate our concern for others beyond ourselves, whether that is in our local communities, whether that is people a million miles away, right? How do we enact concern, right? And show care for people, right? And think about how we accompany, how do we enact our values locally? How do we make use of our spheres of influence as professionals, academics, scholars to enact sort of, how do I say it? To try to be the change we wish to see in the world, to sort of use a beautiful quote, right? So when I think about myself as an American, sometimes students will ask me about, they'll see all kinds of things that are happening out there in the world, and it's just terrible and it's awful. And it's like, how do I help with that? And sometimes they'll be like, well, as American citizens, we actually have really special things that we can do, and a very special privilege that we have as American citizens is actually starting with our legislators, right? Or, thinking about how we start at home, or thinking about what we're doing right here in our own country to realize, to support efforts that are happening around the world, right? So sort of thinking through every day, how do we broaden the circle of concern, and how do we act in ways both locally, small, as well as on a global scale that extend and expand the circle of concern.
Yeah. I like how you both talk about ways like internally, your framework, your perspective, as well as behavior and action, because both are important. I'm curious, kind of shifting to specifically to the Center for Global Engagement. Can you share with our audience members a couple of the opportunities that the Center for Global Engagement that you're currently offering? Virginia, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks. That is one way that our center functions, is by supporting faculty and students and staff with some STEA funds to do some projects. So one of our biggest programs is the President's Global Impact Fund. And there we have grants that support faculty who are starting education, service, or research programs with an international partner or partners. And the goal of that project is to give faculty that initial bump so that they can develop some preliminary data or a preliminary curriculum to then carry it on that project to get external funding or to get the course formally approved by the curriculum committee. And so that project started in 2020. The first few years were a little difficult because of COVID, obviously, and we had to see some extreme flexibility on behalf of the grantees who moved a lot of their research online. And so that funding is still there. And I know you may later address this sort of funding issue that is happening in the global sphere. That's one way that we do continue and hope to consider that like bridge funding until more funding at the federal level is available, knock on wood. And another program we have for students is called the Provost Global Scholar Program. And this is only 2 years old, but this was created, it's a $2,000 unrestricted grant to students that we developed because what we know on our campus, students are going to come to us with so many different types of projects. I mean, that's the beauty of this campus. We have 7 schools. Some students are going to do legal research. Some are going to do research related to their PhD. And if we got too complicated in terms of budgets and things like that, that we would have fewer applicants. So we opened it up with sort of a wing and a prayer that this money would be used well by our students. And it is amazing to see the types and broad projects that we have and that are appropriate for each type of student on our campus, which includes social work students who've used the project to study how aging, admittance to nursing homes happens in Korea. They've looked at different things around reproductive rights in Nigeria. So those are 2 programs that we're really proud of because it's enough money and enough support that we believe, and we've seen in our experience, that it can change a student's career professional trajectory permanently, and it can change a faculty's research agenda permanently. So we have a few others. I'll turn it over to Amy, but those are 2 special ones.
Yeah, so one that I'm involved in that you guys know me for is the Costa Rica Faculty Development Institute, which takes a group of faculty members to Costa Rica every year to work on curriculum design projects, right? So these are faculty members that propose to work on courses or modules, tracks. There's a lot of different terms for curriculum across our 7 schools. And so they work on curriculum design projects during the course of our time in Costa Rica. And there's some pre-departure and post-trip meetings as well. So that's that program. And, right now we're in the process of reviewing applications for the 4th cohort that will be going this December. So that's one program. We also have curriculum internationalization grants, which you, of course, are a 2-time recipient of those funds. And those are small grants that we give to faculty members and sometimes to staff members to implement global curriculum projects, right? So they want some funds to work on to actually put in place a course or an education abroad program or a co-curricular program. That's so things that might be organized within the Division of Student Affairs, for example, that you don't get academic credit for, but it's a learning experience that students can participate in. And so the focus of what I do, particularly my criteria, is that UMB students must be an audience, right? So always with my work, and this has been a hard sort of part of my job sometimes when I'm trying to explain it particularly to our global health faculty that have been very accustomed to thinking about curriculum as work that they do with partners in low and middle income countries. Is no, I want you to design curriculum for students that are enrolled in our degree program. So how do we make use of this great research and service expertise that you have been doing and clinical work that you have been doing overseas? And how do you make sure that our students are benefiting from this expertise that you have developed? So that's very much my wheelhouse.
I did have a question for students that may be interested, just so we get the word out for the Provost Global Scholars Program. Where is that advertised? Where can students find information about
It's
that?
advertised on the Center for Global Engagement webpage under for students. And just so those applications will open again around December 1st of 2025 and probably be due around February 1st, 2026. The idea is that most students will use the money in the summer. So we have a cohort of students that are, going to use the funding this summer,
Hello to David.
including David. And then it'll open again for students for spring break or next summer.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I had a question in regards to future, thinking about in its infancy stage or toddlers, 2 years old now. In regards to, is there opportunity or are they thinking about embedded opportunities for reinvestment based on the international collaboration between institution and global partner or global opportunity? If as the students come back and see like this is really impactful, is there an opportunity or is there somewhere to thought partner to help kind of pipeline other ways to fund, knowing that this is kind of like a seed opportunity to support students?
I mean, that is such a good question. And what we try to do is offer to meet with every student because each student situation is quite individual. But you're referring to it's used in different terms, but in a sense, sustainability, because what in every sphere, whether it's you doing your research or you, Lynn, doing your research at different stages of your professional careers or your time as a student, you want to see how that's going to evolve. And especially when you bring in international partners, you don't want to do a one-off. You want to sort of think how can I keep going with this partner who I've got excited about an issue, who I've learned from. And so we do tackle this issue, and I can say it's quite difficult in some regard, but it's like our challenge, our extreme sport, to make sure that you, for instance, David, if you come to us and say you want to keep working with this partner, that we help you find other sources of funding, or we find other mentors for you to pursue. And Lynn, it's something that we really focus on, who what other sources of fundings are there? Who else can we introduce you to?
Right.
So I can't thank you enough, David, for that question, because we do not want to do one-offs. We don't want to be a center that has just more and more pins on the map.
Right.
We want to be those pins to be deep and meaningful. So that's a goal of ours. It has been and will be going forward.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And leading into the next question, which is kind of weaving into it, is what are some innovative ways that you all have come up with in regards to at CGE and across the university to address some of the funding challenges?
I think one of the things that I just really want to say is I feel like we get very high impact for, in the grand scheme of things, fairly small amounts of money, right? I mean, one of the things that I just want to say is that a lot of what we do in CGE is seeding good ideas, right? And so part of what we do here is very much, I like to think of what we do in CGE as being like the connectors of people, and we have small pots of money, like we're not, and that can really be just enough to help faculty members and students take a good idea and get it up off the ground, right? And we're really lucky and we're truly fortunate that we have faculty members and students that really are just, they can take that money and they can run with it and they can do really impactful things with it for not a lot of funds, right? So I'm just kind of blown away by the vision of many of the applications that we get to take what I consider to be a pretty nominal sum of money and are able to just get findings and results out of research projects or work on something that is itself going to have an impact that is just very amplified, right? So I like curriculum, for example, I always say, if you're going to work on things that are going to live in a core syllabus, or one of the projects that we're funding in the curriculum internationalization grant, they're a faculty member in their law school that teaches the contracts course, for example, they're going to be working on a project to integrate both Indigenous and Western law contract provisions into teaching around contracts, right? And there's also going to be a case law book that she co-authors that's going to integrate some of this content. Now think about the fact that this is now going to be out there for law schools across the US and Canada to now use in the way to teach about contracts. That's a product that's going to far outlive. That's an evergreen product in many respects, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's not a lot of, we're not giving her a whole lot of money to do that, right? And so I think that's one of the ways that we get really creative, and PGIF operates on a very similar model. The projects that get funded are not huge sums of money, but the projects that do get funded create very, very actionable data that now become the foundation for much larger sums of money. Yeah. Virginia, you want to pick up on that?
No, thank you. I think you answered perfectly, is that we try to seed the efforts and then support faculty as they seek external funding, or so students as they seek other pathways like Fulbright or foundation funding to do their work. So we do the initial seed funding, and then try to stay connected to focus on the sustainability piece as well.
I mean, I also have to say that some of the students, particularly the Global Scholar students, some of the proposals that I've read there too have been amazing projects, right? Like just really impressive, amazing projects, right? I always have to say that I'm always impressed by, in particular, social work students, since this is a social work podcast. The ideas that come up in those proposals are really just very novel, creative, and again, social workers are often not operating on big budgets and are having big impact with the work that they're doing. So again, I do want to say that, sometimes you can have a very amplified outsized impact and not a lot of money.
Yeah. In addition to funding, I'm curious to know, what are some of the other challenges to kind of running the Center for Global Engagement? I mean, thinking about the fact you said that's it's a lot of schools, 7 schools and very different disciplines. I mean, I think you all have done a fantastic job of kind of integrating across the schools. I mean, I've formed relationships with pharmacy, nursing, law, medicine, and it's just been extremely helpful for me in the work that I do and making the work more impactful. But what are some of the challenges or that have come up that you've been able to address, or things that you haven't been able to address?
It's funny. I do feel like we have to work right in a sweet spot where we're providing assistance and support, but really understanding that each of the schools, like the School of Social Work, has their own mission and goals and curriculum and things like that. And so we really are careful never to have our own set of goals or requirements or things that run counter to what the school is trying to do. And so I don't call it a challenge because we've been able to thread that needle, but it's something that we constantly try to understand. And so it's very relationship driven. An area that, just an example of working in the central administration with 7 quite independent and different schools, is that, for instance, in the 2021 to 2026 UMB strategic plan, global engagement is one of the themes. And the themes are decided at the highest level and then pushed down to the schools to add goals. And that's an area where you see really widely divergent goals and almost a lost opportunity to work more collaboratively. But that's the tension in a campus like this, where you have a thin central admin and schools. So it's something that we're constantly aware of, but it's also the greatest area of satisfaction and joy, bringing together students and faculty from different schools. And just one little anecdote is, I remember when we first started going to Malawi and we had students from different schools, and one of the students was a law student, and I think a pharmacy student said, "Oh, you're going to work on human rights issues in Malawi?" I really thought lawyers and law students just basically sued people. Like, I didn't understand this bigger perspective. So that's also one of the best things about working here, is you can see the fullness of each profession, of all the things that we do on this campus. And so I'll just leave it there, that can be both somewhat difficult to maneuver and also our greatest strength, I would say.
Right.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the very unique challenges of working on this campus, really, and particularly for me, because I'm so much in the education and the curriculum space, is professional education itself. And most of my career, I have spent more in the graduate education space, which functions quite differently. They are really distinct, right? In the graduate disciplines, right? The academic disciplines. And so even at other universities that I worked at, the academic disciplines, you can never get out of sort of whenever you're in, particularly, I've spent my whole career in research universities. And so you can never get out of sort of the disciplinary siloization in research universities, because that is the orienting logic of academia. What was a real surprise, and it took me a long time to learn, is how rigid professional curricula can be. And that is why we never want to be, it's very much why a lot of the work that we've been doing on curriculum has had to start with faculty and has really had to be very grassroots in this way, and has had to start at a very sort of, okay, I'm going to explain to you what are sort of, from my perspective, what are we trying to achieve with a globalized curriculum? What is it that we're trying to accomplish here? But what I need you, faculty member, to tell me is, how do these words and these ideas link up with priorities, important central ideas or competencies within your field, right? And I need you to help me, we have to have that conversation, that linkage happen, right? So a lot of the work that we do with faculty is really helping have that conversation and linking the dots between, here's what I'm trying to help students to learn, and here's how I make the argument to curriculum committees and to my students about why it's important for you to know this, right? And this is how I make the case for why we have to put this in our curriculum. So it's definitely been a journey in that regard for me to really understand some of that piece. But I love the challenge of that, because That's sort of like having that. I mean, you can never have a full insider perspective of all of these fields and disciplines if you haven't been fully brought up in them. But like, I love the challenge of trying to get inside that mindset. So that's fun for me.
How has CGE re-engaged with the community to address some of the current challenges in our climate?
Well, thanks for that question. And it is the question. I can't say, David, that we fully understand the scope of what's going on right now enough to address it. I think it's causing a lot of us to engage in a lot of conversations and internal dialogue about how important global education is and research with global partners is, and how to keep that going, and how essential it is to keep that going. And it's really making us try to understand that global is really an approach. It's not like a topic. It's an approach to seeing the world, and that's something that we have to do whether the grants are there or whether they're not. So I think that, and we have the support of leadership on this, that we know that our center is going to move forward through challenging times. We're going to keep talking about how important it is to give our students a global open perspective, how important it is to support faculty in their professions collaborating with colleagues around the world, and that's the only way to develop knowledge that's full and broad. On a more concrete level, I think right now we're leaning into, as Amy said, the impact of smaller funding opportunities, and also reaching out to donors to ask for support from donors. And we're hoping to use this as a time of growth, as a bridge time, that when funding spigot opens up, or when we fully understand the situation, we haven't just been waiting, twiddling our thumbs, but we've been preparing for that, and we're ready to go, and that we're just as global a university, when that happens. So it's a little bit of a broad answer, but yeah, it's hard to get a full picture yet, but we're full steam ahead.
I just want to, that's a beautiful answer, Virginia,
Yeah.
but I piggyback onto it, and maybe it's going to sound too optimistic, but this is where I just truly believe that our work in education is like the work of planting trees whose shade you'll never sit, right? I always think to myself that the work that we're doing inside education is truly the work of, we're developing the next generation, right? We're developing the next generation of leaders for our country and for our world, right? And so, to the extent that we maintain a sense of optimism and hope in spite of challenges that we see today, that's just so important, and that remains critical, and that remains, like the North Star for what we're doing every day in CGE. So, we've been through difficult times before, and we've always gotten through them. And I continue to practice daily gratitude for good colleagues and great people every day. And, always just, we have there's a lot to be concerned about in the world, and I don't want to minimize that, but there's a lot to be grateful for too. So, we keep doing the good work. That's what I always tell people. Yeah.
I really appreciate both of your answers. Both, like, I feel like I needed that today. When I teach students of the that, it doesn't mean that things feel great and that there isn't concern that we should have and we should be acting and doing, but also having hope and valuing the relationships, like the relationship that I have with both of you, with all three of you actually, is of value, and one of the reasons why I love the work that I do. So I love that. Thank you. I did want to ask a question about, in an ideal world, if you had all the resources available to you in terms of funding, other resources, not even, monetary, but if you had all the resources in the world, what one or two things do you think you would add to the Center for Global Engagement? What would that look like?
Well, I personally would love to have a program that gave each student the chance to have a global opportunity. And by that, I mean either getting on a plane, but probably mostly for most students who we have a lot of students who have jobs and families and things, not getting on a plane, but having the opportunity that we've curated to interact with different communities, experience what it's like to be vulnerable in the face of other communities and other situations. And I would love to see a program where each student had the chance to have a curated global opportunity that opens their eyes, whether here or abroad. And then, so that's a dream I have. And then another dream would be to get more faculty involved in global work, not by necessarily changing their topical focus of their research or teaching, but finding like colleagues in other settings. And the way I would really love to do that is by having sort of workshops, hosting thematic workshops around the world where faculty can meet each other and say, oh, you're studying this type of science. Oh, I am too. Wouldn't it be nice if we did that together? And I know that works because we have a wonderful donor who's given us money to support an Asian collaborative in Costa Rica. And when you do put faculty together in a room, and I find that sort of human contact really works, and have them talk about, for instance, their microbiome studies, the synergies are amazing, but it's bringing folks together and then having some funding to then support that idea. I would love to have 100 workshops around the world so that faculty, I think they are really hungry for that. Like, how do you make that connection? And then how, and have ways to support it. So that's my dream world.
I just came back from the gerontology course in Japan, and my ear was really laser focused on grief care globally and what were some of the terminology that was utilized locally. And it wasn't until we went to our sister partner school, which was St. Mariana, which is the medical school, where we, as a interdisciplinary team, lawyers, medical students, medical doctor, social worker, pharmacy students, we were surrounded by all manner of medical doctors and students. And it was the first time that it clicked that the one person in the room talking about mental health was not a social worker, was not a nurse, but a psychiatrist. And that was our connection. And it began to make me think about, how do I, as a PhD student and researcher on our campus, begin to create the relationship between our medical school and the conversation between their medical school and psychiatry. Prior to this trip, I never even thought about the partnership between social work and psychiatry on a global level. And so now, and this unique serendipitous opportunity of Japan and Maryland having such a unique relationship on a governor level. And so, even this conversation has me percolating on what does that look like, is that can be student-led as an opportunity to continue this, because we all know that there's many aspects that cannot be met. But as a researcher, we see gaps in the area, and how can we fill those gaps?
I honestly feel like you just gave us a new hashtag for our center, but it's that click that you had. That's all we're trying to do. That's a small thing, but it's a huge thing. It's just that click where you realize something different about your country or your perspective or the people that you're with, that then just makes you go, in a different direction. So thank you for that.
That's what's beautiful about global education. And I'll say why, because when you're in an environment, like, your antennas are so up, like, that's what it is. I'm convinced, because you're so highly attuned, because the environment is so different, that you're so observant of things that you would not be observant of in your daily life. Because you're a little desensitized to it, because it's so routinized for you, right? And so, like, you understand things differently, and you're like, why don't I talk to my colleagues in psychiatry? I'm on a campus with a school of medicine, and we're both interested in mental health. Like, why don't I know anybody in psychiatry? Right? And so, these are the kinds of things, right? They suddenly start to realize very quickly that it's like, wow. And I just think that's one of the amazing things about global education, is you understand your profession, you understand yourself, you understand your country, you understand so many different things differently, because things that just seem very normal every day to you that you haven't even asked questions about will look very different to you through the eyes of another place or another people. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to unfortunately have to wrap up our time here for this episode, but we have one final question for you both. Can you tell us one thing that every prospective student should know about global work at UMB? And Amy, you want to get this started?
Do it. It's great. There's so many opportunities. If you're interested, you should absolutely do it. And the other thing that I really want to say is there's lots of opportunities for you within the School of Social Work. Dr. Michalopoulos here is an amazing leader. And there's more and there's things for you to do interdisciplinary too, right? We work very hard. So one of the things we've talked a lot about the work that we do with faculty, but something I really want to say for students is that the work that we do with faculty, particularly my work on curriculum and faculty development, is so that we have new opportunities for students in the pipeline continuously, right? So like if you are interested in things that you're not seeing, let me know, Virginia, reach out to us. We'd love talking to students because we want to listen to your ideas and we would love to figure out how to support you in your global aspirations. But absolutely do it because it's a life-changing experience. We know from every student that has an opportunity to do it, and it will change the way you think about your life and your career and your profession.
And I would just say that we get you. We understand you. I respect our colleagues at the undergraduate level so much. I was up at Towson today on a undergraduate campus or a campus with a lot of undergraduates, but we know our students here at UMB. We know social work students and so the global opportunities are tailored to your interests, to your future career, to your time frame too, because you may not have a whole semester to spend abroad, although I know the School of Social Work has opportunities like that. We know that you're in a very rigorous curriculum. You don't have much time, but we really recommend you think about a global opportunity because it will enrich your education, and we have opportunities tailored for your time and your interest.
And I just say something really quickly to my fellow peers. A few of my peers were uncomfortable applying because they didn't know who to recommend them for recommendation letters. And what I would say is, again, just do it. Begin having a conversation with your professors, with your director of your program. Even if you're not aware of where you want to land globally, begin to let them know that you want to be connected to global opportunities. So when you potentially do see these opportunities in emails, in the Elm, through casual conversations, you're not blindsided by the fact of you already have a reservoir of people that know that you have global on your mind and that they're ready to support you with a quick recommendation just so that you're connected to this opportunity or these opportunities.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Virginia and Amy, for all of your insight. And this was a wonderful conversation. It's always great to talk to both of you. So thank you, everyone, for listening to the Social Work is Everywhere podcast. If you've been inspired by the stories and impact shared today, please consider supporting the University of Maryland School of Social Work. Your donation helps fund scholarships, research, innovative teaching, and community partnerships that make a real difference.
Every gift matters. Visit sfw.umaryland.edu/give to donate today. Please choose other and specify global.
And to request more information about admission to the University of Maryland School of Social Work, visit ssw.umaryland.edu/MSW. Thank you again. Bye for now.
Go social workers and allies.
Thank you.